Good evening or morning, everybody, and welcome to Suspect's third anniversary reading. We are delighted to have you all here to celebrate with us. So tonight we have a selection of fiction, poetry, and non-poetry readings, and we'll hear from some of our editors about the process of reading and editing for Suspect. I'm Shamini, the editor-in-chief of Suspect, and I'll just be saying a few introductory words to kick us off. Suspect came into being in the February of 2022, but it has its roots before that. Its first incarnation was the online publishing arm of Singapore Unbound, which founder Ji Leong Koh will talk a little bit more later on. I joined this publishing arm in the October of 2020 as a fiction reader. So my job at the time was to solicit works of fiction from writers whose works I was interested in. We had a vague direction then that we wanted to be publishers of Asian work, but what it means to be Asian is, of course, more rich and varied than it might seem on the surface. With that in mind, my first approach in solicitation was geographic. I wanted to go beyond the confines of what people typically thought of when they thought of Asia. So I reached out to, and we published, as Singapore Unbound, writers of merit from Iran to Kazakhstan. We had writers from the Japanese diaspora in Peru and Nepal, writing on a variety of topics and in a variety of styles. We even published translated work. What we really wanted to do was to explore the depth and breadth of Asia and to really provoke what it meant to be Asian. In February 2022, we decided that we wanted to launch Suspect into a proper platform for writers and readers of Asian heritage. Since then, we've been receiving constant submissions. I don't have to solicit works anymore from writers throughout the world. It has been 3 years since, and we are proud to have published a range of emerging and established writers. At the same time, Suspect does not want to forget its Southeast Asian roots, so we try to publish annual portfolios that speak directly to Southeast Asian history and experiences. So far, we have published a Malay translation portfolio and a portfolio on the Malayan trade unionist Lim Chin Siong. This year, we'll be also putting out an eco portfolio that aims to publish writers from Asia more generally, but please also do keep an eye out for a portfolio that we have in mind about the Nusantara region, taking a deeper dive into archipelagic histories and possibilities. With that said, I'd like to pass the time on now to Ji Leong Koh, Suspect's publisher and the organizer of Singapore Unbound. Ji, please.
Thank you so much, Shamini. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of you here. I'm so happy to celebrate, Suspect's third year with all of you. My name is Ji Leong Koh. I'm the publisher of Suspect. I'm also the founder and organizer of Singapore Unbound, a New York City-based literary organization that envisions and works for a creative and fulfilling life for everyone through the arts and activism. So Singapore Unbound does two things. We organize events such as this one, and we also publish. So we publish poetry, fiction, and nonfiction through Suspect, and we publish books through our press, Gardy Boy. So do look us up, Singapore Unbound, and we're so pleased to continue supporting Suspect as a vital organ for Asians to read Asians. Over to you. All right, back to you, Shamini.
Thank you, Ji. We'll now be moving to our first reader, Ratu Yusei, who first published with us in 2024. His short story, He Who Knows Himself, is an intimate exploration of the intersections between the self, the other, and the divine. Before I introduce Ratu, however, I will briefly talk about the work that Suspect does in fiction. So I was and still am Suspect's fiction editor. We receive a range of weekly submissions from writers who are interested to publish with us, and although we cannot accept every piece, it is always a joy to see the variety of perspectives and personalities that these writers arise from. I work closely with Suspect's fiction editing intern, Faith Ho, who unfortunately cannot join us tonight. But once Faith and I decide to accept a piece, we embark on a process of close and collaborative editing with the writers. This is always a rewarding chance to learn from each other, and I've even struck up friendships with writers whose works we formerly published. One such writer who it has been a privilege to work with is Ratu Yusei. So Ratu is a writer from Kelana Jaya and a final year creative writing undergrad at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. He has had creative works published on Men Matters Online and Suspect, as well as critical essays on genealogies of modernity. He has also read his works at the Georgetown Literary Festival and has translated poetry for the World Poetry Movement in Malaysia. His writings expound the presence of something bigger in the smallest and most seemingly insignificant places. So Ratu, over to you.
Thank you, Sharmini. That was a great introduction. So I think we can just get right into it. I'll be beginning and ending with a poem, but with two poems. And in between, I will read an excerpt that was published on Suspect itself. So the poem that I'll be beginning with is actually a formal poem, as in like formatted poetry, and it's a villanelle entitled The Lover's Villanelle. All limbs would fold into a lover's kiss and feel the heat of passion numb the mind. Ah, could there be a thing worth more than this? When life sends trials that cannot be dismissed, killing the will to keep on in the fight, all limbs can fold into a lover's kiss. The feel of skin on skin is worldly bliss on nights that bodies swear themselves divine. But could there be a thing worth more than this? When fingers clasp into a bigger fist and tangling tongues get tangled up like vines, all limbs will fold into a lover's kiss. Once the self is found lost in an abyss, a light within the eyes begins to shine. Perhaps there might be something more than this. Look to the garden where rivers persist, where God and man will finally unite. Let all limbs fold into the beloved's kiss and know that love itself is more than this. Thank you. That was The Lover's Villanelle, a poem I actually wrote recently for class. And it's heavily inspired by the idea of, the beloved within the Sufi tradition, which really informs my um, religious practice. And this is also something that comes through in the rest of my work. And it definitely is something that inspired the next piece I'll be reading, which is an excerpt from the short story published on Suspects, He Who Knows Himself. Now, nothing is nearer to you than yourself. And if you know not yourself, how can you know anything else? The Friday azan fills the afternoon sky from the loudspeaker of the surah. Loud streams drum onto the floor tiles, gushing from galvanized iron taps. My face is wet with wudu water as I adjust my songko in front of the mirror on the outer wall, straightening my golden songket sampin and ensuring my black baju melayu is well tucked. I gaze into the mirror, noting the little imperfections that distinguish my body. The subtle hairs growing between my eyebrows I never knew existed until Magat mentioned I should get them trimmed. The teeth I never realized were slightly crooked until a cute guy told me that he likes a man with perfect whites. The bit of fat below my chin I never really cared about until some stranger on Grindr typed out for me, unsolicited. Kalau kurus, mesti handsome ni. You'd be handsome if you were thinner. He didn't even bother opening with a hi. Al-Ghazali believed that we're all rusty mirrors and that our duty is to polish ourselves so that we may, if Allah wills, reflect even a photon of his qualities. Life is a journey towards perfection, achieved only through strictly observing the divine laws with the purest intention. But I keep wondering, how does one purify their intention? قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم. I recognize the Khatib's opening line. Stepping into the air-conditioned interior, I feel the coolness reassure me. I make my way through the congregation seated on the soft azure carpet, finding gaps to pass through like navigating an obstacle course, sauntering past the familiar sight of members of the workforce as they recharge from their draining 9-to-5s. Once I reach the frontmost row, I place myself in between an attentive bearded old guy wearing a kupiah and thobe and a handsome young man dozing off in office clothes. I'm trying to pay attention to the Khatib speaking on the mimbar, but my eyes can't help wandering to the right. His jaw is well defined. His lips look soft and thick. His hair, luscious like a lion's mane. Not a blemish can be found anywhere on his clean-shaven complexion. I notice the lanyard hanging from his neck, facing my way. Squinting, I make his name out as Yusuf. Just watching Yusuf's sleeping expression stirs something in me. My mind spends the remainder of the khutbah deciding whether it's desire or envy. Aqimus salah. The Iqamah startles Yusuf from his brief nap. We both stand up like every other attendant, packing ourselves tightly in our row and leaving no room for shaitan. Following the Imam, we raise our hands while calling aloud, Allahu Akbar, before folding them to rest on our stomachs. I feel Yusuf's arm pressing onto mine. His firm muscles are distracting, but I muster all my mental strength to ignore them, focusing on my prayer and minding the most minute detail of my movements. I have to be fussy. If I'm not heedful of even the swinging of my index finger, I may never discern what pleases my Lord. I may never benefit from the blessings he might shower upon me. I may never know what it's like to open up the door and come home to him happy. And that's the end of the excerpt. Now, before I end my session, I will be reading a poem that I actually wrote in my first year. And it was a poem that came out of like finding peace with a resolve, within this typical conflict between like being religious and being queer. And it's a poem that I really treasure until this day that was published in the University Literary Magazine, and it's called Petrichor at Dawn. ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. Picture this, you fixing up breakfast in the kitchen while I'm writing yet another poem about how I love that two men in love can pray Fajr together in their home as we just did. I was the Imam because you still aren't confident in your Quran recitation, even though I've told you many times that you read just fine. You stood by me as we both faced the Kaaba, two soul-bound vicegerents in audience with our Lord. I'm at my desk by the window because you're not currently in the room, and I refuse to write if I'm not bearing witness to the beauty of at least one of his creations. I open it up, reaching out, feeling the coolness of the atmosphere wrapping around my arm, how the wet grass smells like Eden. A glimpse of paradise swaddles me for a moment until I feel your hands on my shoulder, letting me know that the food is ready. My body burns instantly with worldly want. I give you that look that prompts you to pull me to the bed, and we begin another round of lovemaking in the peace of our very own Shurga. And that's the end of my poem. Thank you so much for having me read tonight. Thank you so much. I pass it on back to Sharmini.
Thank you, Ratu, for that wonderful piece. I've always admired so deeply the thoughtfulness and intricacy with which you explore a desire for both the human and the divine, and in so doing, dissolve the barriers between both. And you have such talent as well. So now we'll hand the time over to Jack C., our poetry editor. Jack C. is a queer disabled Singapore-based writer who enjoys relocating bugs so that they don't get stepped on. They've appeared in several poetry journals and anthologies, both in Singapore and otherwise. So Jack, the time is yours.
Hello. So yes, I'll start off by sharing my experience with Suspect so far. I started about 2 Julys ago. Since then, the world has been a very eventful and exhausting place to exist in, I feel. I think most of us can agree. But I guess Suspect has provided me every month with at least one email I'm pleased to see in my inbox in the form of submissions. I think every month there's at least one submission that kind of grabs me by the shoulders and says, like, yes. I feel like the poetry editor I took over from, Marilyn Tan, kind of did a really great job at highlighting works that took something horrible and made something beautiful out of it. Like I'm still haunted by Yehangya's death threats and other poems, which I'll link to later. I feel like there's kind of a quality to the writing I'm looking for and always excited to see when someone is unflinching about their convictions or about putting forth a certain viewpoint that isn't really heard usually. Maybe changing the angle with which we see something. Um, and it's not just the poems that make it through to publication that do that. I feel like there are some which just kind of land in our pile and it just needs a little bit more editing, a little more pushing to kind of reach that level of being firm and unyielding, I suppose. So I guess what I'm trying to say is just submit. This goes out to every writer. I feel like editing for a suspect has kind of pushed me to realize that, yeah, you just have to swing for it sometimes, and to be unflinching with yourself. So, yeah, that's a hint for open calls. Please submit. Um, so, in line with what I've said about being excited for the unexpected and bold, I'm honored to introduce our next reader for tonight, Paul Cadafago. Paul is a Palestinian Lebanese writer and cultural organizer based in New Orleans. He's performed spoken word poetry at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe and the Poetry Project in New York City. His work has been published in Tribes, The Pedestal, Suspect, and Conch. His poem Remember Us, first published in Suspect Journal, was nominated for a 2025 Best of the Net Award. Paul's first book, Sumud, Poems of the Palestinian Diaspora, was published in 2024 by Sligo Creek Publishing. So, Paul, take us away. Hey, sorry, Paul, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
I am muted. You know, it's an issue with Palestinians, but in this case, I muted myself. So, no, I just want to thank you, Jack. I want to thank everyone for this invitation and also for publishing me in December 2023. And so the first poem I'm going to read was actually published in Suspect. It's called Remember Us. And I wrote it very quickly. I have a friend, Nicole Delgado, who's a great poet from Puerto Rico that I knew in New York about 20 years ago. And in November of 2023, a month after the genocide in Gaza started, she reached out to me and she had been invited to do an online poetry thing for Palestine. And so she asked me if I had any poems online because she was looking for something and she didn't find anything. And my tradition for a long time was spoken word, and I don't really submit, you know. And but what happened was that when the genocide started, you know, in the book that I published in Sumud, which means steadfastness in Arabic, there's 17 poems. It's a small book, and 13 of the poems were written after the genocide. And it just sort of a coping mechanism, but also I have this desire now, not to be published per se, but to be out there, you know, and to be part of a narrative of Palestinian poets in my case in the diaspora. So I wrote this poem for her, and she read it, and then she has a small printing press in Puerto Rico, and she produced a beautiful broadsheet. And actually, out of that, I'm going to the Puerto Rico International Poetry Festival in March, which is very exciting. So the first poem is called Remember Us. Please remember us. Remember we were known for our generosity and our creativity. Remember we value song and poetry. Remember that our culture esteemed writers, teachers, and farmers. Remember we did not idolize material or money. Remember, though, we were a people who worshiped the Creator in different ways and believed in different theologies. We practiced tolerance and acceptance of the other. Remember, we were a people who valued friendship and family, and if you became our friend, you were a member of our family. Remember that in our houses, there were 4 generations who lived. Remember, we were a people who honored both our elders and our children. Remember, when you entered our houses, we asked you if you were hungry. Remember the food we made for you, that you had never seen so much food, that it was all so delicious. Remember that before we ate, regardless of our religion, we thanked the Creator, and we did the same after we finished eating. Remember our land, how we cherished it and tended to it, understanding it as a gift of the Creator. Remember the orange groves and the pomegranate trees. Remember you helped harvest our olive trees in the fall. Remember. Remember our joy, our embroidery, our culture of poetry. Remember how much we love life, how we regarded every day a blessing. Remember, they will tell you lies now. They will have you judge us by the actions of a few. They will not tell you why some of us were rendered mad when our lands were stolen. They will say we are evil. They will say we are terrorists. Some will say that we are not even human and worthy of basic rights. They will kill our children and justify the killings. They will do horrific things to us and never be held accountable, and you will become very weary. But remember who we are and where we come from. Remember our light, our generosity, and our love. Remember our dignity. So in these difficult times, as we are in deep grief, mourning the deaths of thousands of our people, stand with us, grieve with us, then struggle for justice with us. Read our poems, eat our foods, wear clothes with our embroidery, bear witness to whom you know us to be. Remember how when you came and stayed with us, we laughed so much and how much we love life. So remember all of that and do not pity us now, but stand with us and remember who we were and who we always be. Remember our strength and our resolve. Remember we taught you a word in Arabic that is particular to our people, samud, which means steadfastness. Remember our samud, how steadfast we are. Remember when you left us, we told you to come back, to return. Remember, we too shall return. Remember, we shall return. So the next poem, which was also published in Suspects, and it's a little lighter and it's very much a spoken word piece. And it's an interesting dynamic since the pandemic started. Doing for a spoken word poet, doing these Zoom readings can be a little disconcerting because it's literally talking into, in this case, because my computer's down, I'm talking into a phone. So it's kind of interesting. This poem is called Identification. They said they wanted a Palestinian poet. When I showed up, I knew they were disappointed. They said, you don't have a typical Palestinian name. I said, my family has roots hundreds of years, probably thousands in Palestine. And what is a typical Palestinian name anyway? My name Paul is a popular name amongst Palestinian Christians, I said. They asked, shocked, there are Palestinian Christians? Then they told me, you speak with a New York accent, and your poems don't always mention Palestine. And many of them aren't even about Palestine. And I said, I'm Palestinian. My life has been threatened because I'm Palestinian. That's very Palestinian. And they always give me a hard time at the airport in Tel Aviv near Jaffa, which they used to call the city of poets, the city where my father was born. That's very Palestinian. And my father's family owned orange groves. They were in the orange business in Jaffa. My grandmother's family owned part of Mount Carmel in Haifa on the Mediterranean coast. That's very Palestinian. And when I went to Palestine the first time, I was shot at by soldiers of the Israeli Defense Forces. That's very Palestinian. And when I leave occupied Palestine, the young Israeli customs officer at the airport always asks me, did you meet with Palestinian Arabs? That's very Palestinian. Yes, I met with Palestinian Arabs because they make really good food and they like telling jokes, but they also have a lot of pathos. And I'm a poet. I like pathos. That's very Palestinian. And yeah, you're right. I have a New York accent because I was born in exile to political refugees in Queens, New York City. And being born in exile to political refugees is a very Palestinian thing. Yes, I speak with a New York accent, but if you want me to effectuate a Levantine accent, like pronouncing P's as B's, like Paul the Palestinian poet becomes Baal the Palestinian poet, I could do that. I could accommodate you. That's very Palestinian. How much are you paying? Poets aren't supposed to talk about money, especially Palestinian poets in exile. Then they asked me, can you write more Palestinian poems? I said, listen, I could have been born on Mars, and speak with a Martian accent, but my lineage from my father's side is Palestinian. I'm Palestinian. So even if I write poems about donkeys or sunshine or trees, they were all Palestinian poems. You feel me? And how much did you say you were paying? So, should I continue? Hello?
If you'd like to continue, we'd like to hear more. But if not,
Okay.
then it's fine as well.
Yeah, I have more. Thank you. So I'll write a sort of a shorter one and one about immigration because my parents were political refugees. This is called A Poem is a Knife. A poem is a knife. It will splay you open nice and fast. If you do it right, it will cut the fat right out of you. A poem has no agenda or purpose, no morality or conscience, just its own imperfect universe where you bravely live every damn day. A poem is not for the faint of heart, and it is not non-violent at all. In fact, after the poem has done what it needs to do to you, rip you apart without prejudice, you'll see. A poem is a knife, a damn knife. And this poem is called Ignorance. You didn't know the name of the town in Guatemala where the little girl who would die on the northern side of the border, on your side, on my side, was from. The town she fled with her father. You didn't know the names of the dictators the CIA installed in several Central American countries for years, trained them at the School of the Americas in Georgia, on your side, on my side of the border, paid for by your tax dollars in your name and mine too. You didn't know exactly how countries become corrupt and destabilized, how the rule of law disappears, how there is no protection from gang violence, no economic hope for families, because refugees leave their countries because they seek refuge from death, because they seek hope. And life. You didn't know. You didn't know that my dad, who liked a little girl from Guatemala, was a refugee. You didn't know he was born in a city called Jaffa in Palestine. You didn't know they used to call Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast the city of poets, and that later, after 1948, long after my father had left Palestine, after Israel was founded, Jaffa became a city of drug addicts and lost souls. You looked at my dad's light skinned, his Italian last name, and mine too. You didn't know he was Palestinian. You didn't know he was a refugee. For years, we didn't say anything. You didn't know that if things had been just a little different, my father could have been a refugee from the South, from Guatemala or Honduras or Salvador. You didn't know. You didn't know what your American tax dollars pay for, the occupation, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and now genocide of my father's people, my people. You didn't know the culture of the refugees they told you to fear. You didn't know the food you loved, the hummus, falafel, pho, kebabs, injera, tamales, pupusas, tacos were made by refugees. You didn't know the refugees could be engineers, poets, musicians, dancers, scientists, doctors, and lawyers who became taxi drivers, security guards, short order cooks, and construction workers to provide for their families. They came from countries like Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, Yemen, Palestine, Syria, Vietnam, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Iran, and Iraq, looking for a life without war and violence. You didn't know that the US-led war against Iraq that began in the spring of 2003 was unnecessary. You didn't know Saddam Hussein was on the CIA payroll for years and that he never had weapons of mass destruction. You didn't know the exact numbers of Iraqi children who were slaughtered. And so Dick Cheney's Halliburton could become richer and you could put cheap gas in your SUV. You didn't know that these things were connected. You didn't know that the machine, the child killing, resource hoarding, exploitation machine wants you to be ignorant, to not know that poverty and hunger and the deaths of refugee children are unnecessary. You didn't know because the machine didn't want you to know. And you're so overworked and tired anyway. You didn't know, but you should have. You should have known. And I guess this is the last poem. It's called Thai. It's for Thich Nhat Hanh. It's a different poem, Thai. And I wrote it after he died in 2022. Rainwater kisses your lips. You taste the world again slowly and deliberately, raindrop by raindrop, here now in Vietnam, in Gaza, in the Warsaw Ghetto, in Plum Village, everywhere. And nowhere. You hold out your hand, you hold out your open hand, Thai. You start a peaceful uprising with your stillness, and you smile. Under the banyan tree there, you enter a posture and recite a sutra. You and I are sitting in a cafe in Paris now. You smile and give a girl a daffodil. You say, we should never forget the children of war. And you sigh and you say, we were all children of war. You begin to tell me the story of your brother monks who burned themselves protesting the war in Vietnam, your beloved homeland. I tell you, in Palestine, children became bombs. We cry together. How is it that one's life becomes so unbearable, they feel they must die to experience freedom? I tell you, sometimes I feel the weight of the world on me, sometimes too heavy to bear. You say, the world is a feather, and you flash a brilliant smile. And you say, joy is a practice, and freedom is now. You whisper, peace is now. Still smile, still, you pour me more tea. You say, generosity is nothing more than gratitude. You show me a poem you've been writing. You tell me about your mother, Thai. You are gone now, but still here drinking tea with me and reading poems. You are everywhere now, in the sunshine and the rain, in the mountains of Nicaragua and the South African plains, during harmony and during pain. You are everywhere, Thai, and you are nowhere, Thai, everywhere and nowhere. I think, is that 10 minutes?
Yep, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, that was great.
Sorry if I went on. Arabs are not good with time. And I live in New Orleans. There's no sense of time here because there's so many musicians, which is great. So everything is like syncopation. It's a different way of being. So thank you again. It was my honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And no need to apologize at all. It was our honor to have you read with us and thank you again for that very necessary and moving set of poems and the reminders that they gave us. I was so moved to read those that you published on Suspect for the first time, and it was so powerful to hear you speak them into being here. I'm so glad as well that you managed to have the chance to read with us today, even though you're dialing in from somewhere where it's really early. So thank you again, and don't worry about the timing. It was so wonderful to hear your poetry and so necessary as well. So yeah, although our reviews editor Alice Choi is not here with us today, she has left a few words about her section for me to convey. So Alice is our reviews editor, and she is also an editor, translator, and cat mother based in Portland, Oregon. She's also been a writer, instructor, graduate student, and admin. Her literary interests include the Asian/American, the diaspora, translation, comics, and genre fiction. I will be sharing a short write-up about her experience in her own words and in first person. So I live in Portland, Oregon, and I was interested in participating in an online Asian literary community, which is how I found Singapore Unbound Suspect, for which I eventually wrote a few book reviews. I was asked to become fiction review editor in the fall of 2023, and since then we've had the pleasure of publishing 15 reviews of novels, short story collections, essay collections, memoirs, academic monographs, a comics anthology, and many more in the pipeline. I see our goal as uplifting both established and emerging Asian writers who have published in the last year or two. And towards this goal, we work primarily with book reviewers of Asian descent. The reviewers range from bookstagrammers to academics and are based in the US, UK, Singapore, Malaysia, India, South Korea, and Australia. All of our work is done online via hundreds of emails and dozens of Word documents, as well as in accompanying audio files and art images. One of the pleasures of being a review editor is learning about Asian writers that I wouldn't have known about if not for our lovely reviewers' pitches and reviews. I've also since learned the field of contemporary Asian literature from both the homeland and abroad is larger than in my imagination was capable of perceiving, and it's a pleasure to help share a small part of it to our readers. So, moving on, Suspect is not only a journal of Asian writing, but Asian art. We aim to publish alongside each written piece a carefully curated selection of artworks from emerging and established artists from Asia. To achieve this, we have a team of two wonderful art editors who I'll now introduce before I pass the time on to them. So Mickey Wong is Suspect's art director. She is a multidisciplinary designer currently working in branding and advertising. When she isn't in front of a screen, you can usually find her around the city practicing analog photography, thrift shopping, or fueling her expensive coffee habit in trendy cafes. Tiffany Wu, our assistant art director, is currently based in Shanghai. So her poems can be found in Black Horror Review, Science Theatre Magazine, The Offing, and elsewhere. She is a recent graduate of Williams College, where she studied art history. So I'll hand over the time to Mickey and Tiffany now to tell us a little bit more about the process of art selection and their work with Suspect's artists. Tiffany?
Okay, just checking that everyone can see my screen right now. Is it? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Sharmini. I am so excited to be here today. My name is Tiffany. I'm the assistant art director for Suspect, currently based between Shanghai and the UK. And I work with our art director, Mickey Wong, who has been with Suspect since its very early beginnings. Mickey unfortunately cannot join us today, but she put together this wonderful PowerPoint slide, and I am very excited to be sharing a bit about the work that goes on behind Suspect's art directing today. These are the segments I will be going through, an introduction, and then the work that we featured, our process. Basically, Mickey and I are responsible for sourcing artworks to accompany the articles published by Suspect, and we really believe in the importance of platforming art made by artists of Asian heritage across different mediums. By featuring artworks side by side with the text, we hope to encourage more nuanced readings and also to give underrepresented artists a platform with our readers at Suspect. For us, art direction is all about storytelling, and these works we see here on the right is a multimedia performance work by the artist Soyoung L. Kim, a South Korean artist based in Boston right now, and it was featured alongside a review on Suspect. Now a deeper kind of introduction into the work that we have featured. Over time, we've managed to collaborate with some incredible artists based internationally in Southeast Asia, in the USA, as well as other parts of the world. And these are all artists at different stages in their careers. We're really excited to feature emerging artists as well. This is just a small selection of some of the artists shared in the slide today. And I also think it's really important to highlight that the images we feature are chosen not to illustrate the text per se, but rather to put together artists and writers who have some of the same artistic concerns in dialogue with each other. We see here works by the artist Bodhi Wijaya, an Indonesian multimedia artist based in Singapore. And his work is featured alongside a review by Anna Tan. Next, a quick word about our process. So as mentioned, we select artworks that align with the themes of a published article or engage with similar concerns. We reach out to the artist to request permission to feature their images on our site. Our sources include gallery websites, artist portfolios, and social media platforms. I personally keep track of artists that we're interested in or that we've been following that we think would be suitable for Future Suspect publications. And Mickey and I are working to compile an Excel sheet of all future artists that we would like to collaborate with. Since last year, we have also begun inviting authors to suggest artists whose work they would like to see featured alongside their writing. And this has definitely made our process more efficient and has also put more emerging artists who are otherwise harder to find on our radar. After we reach out to the artists and have gotten a response, part of my work is to coordinate the logistical side of things, including artist contracts, drafting and writing image descriptions, etc. Here are some of the other artists whose work we've really enjoyed, who have been featured alongside some poems we've published. On the left, we have Hav Kahraman, who is from Iraq and the US. And then in the middle, we have Chok Susyun, who is from a Singaporean installation artist. And on the right, we have Stanley Tong, Chinese American ceramic artist. And because our images don't come from submission or solicitation, but require sourcing, Mickey and I have faced some challenges with keeping up with the weekly publications. And when this happens, Mickey very kindly designs these quote cards that are intended to be visually captivating while also maintaining cohesion with the other images on the site and the artworks that we've had. So I will be ending here, but last but not least, if you are an artist or if your friends are artists, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Suspect Journal or to Mickey Wong, whose email is here on the screen. Thank you so much for listening. I will hand it back over to Sharmini now.
Thank you, Tiffany, for that insightful glimpse into the art selection process. So we'll now move on to the last genre that Suspect currently publishes, creative nonfiction and essays, which is a rather wide umbrella. So our essays editorial intern is Noraisha Shafiq, a Malaysian writer based in New York City. So she enjoys writing across genres and delving into the ideas of interspecies kinship, collaborative survival, and non-human ecologies. So Aisha is currently working on her first novel. Aisha, over to you.
Thank you, Sharmini. So, thank you for everyone joining us today. I've only been editing essays for Suspect for only a few months. I started last September. I've been working closely with G, but already I've been so privileged to read really powerful, compelling, complex work by really talented writers from around the world, about history, the body, identity, and politics, to name a few. It's doubly moving to be editing essays as someone who also works in the mode of fiction and poetry, because the material of essays is so visibly inseparable from the lived experience and subjectivities of our contributors. And with that comes a lot of responsibility that I feel when I'm editing, not only to honor our writers' personal narratives, to preserve their voice, to ensure that my sensibilities as a reader and writer are not encroaching over on their work, but to also help them convey their stories to the public as powerfully as they can, and to fulfill the intentions that are latent in all of their drafts. I'm always sure to begin every round of feedback by first affirming my admiration and respect for the vulnerability and bravery that my writers show to be open about their experiences, to share them, and to also frame the editorial process as one of collaboration. It's important to me, and I think to the wider Suspect ethos, to ensure that our writers are as empowered in this process, and to continue to feel ownership and creative license over their work. It's now my honor to introduce our nonfiction reader, Jasmine Goy, Jasmine Gui is a Singaporean-born interdisciplinary artist and PhD candidate currently living and working in District 1 Spoon Territory, Toronto, Canada. She works in paper, ceramics, tea, and experimental book formats through an interdisciplinary arts and publishing space, Tay Studio. Please give a warm welcome to Jasmine.
Thank you, Aisha. Today I'll be reading two works. One is a fragmented excerpt from the piece that was published in Suspect, I think 2 years ago now, and a prose poem that I've been reading iteratively at a lot of the events that I've been reading at. So I draw the eyes in. Zhang Sengyo comes to town. He has been asked to paint dragons on the temple wall for an upcoming festival. Over the next few days, people notice that the 4 dragon forms he's created have no pupils in their eyes. If I draw them in, he explains, they will come to life and escape this wall. The townspeople are skeptical. They request the eyes be painted in. Zhang steps up and dots in the eyes of two dragons, and lightning strikes the wall. Both newly seen dragons leap into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. This was first recorded in Zhang Yenyuan's Tang epic, Notes of Past Famous Paintings. The first time I experienced the power of dragon eyes is at bedtime. My father is a skilled storyteller, spinning episodes of Singapore's most famous protagonist, Xiao Ming, an adventure with talking monkeys, hungry tigers, and sly Javanese mynas. Old jokes are told and retold, sprinkled with classic fables, groan-inducing sayings on wisdom and foolishness. My sister and I, instead of being lulled to sleep, clamor for more. Postscript 1. The seeing dragons are summoned to a life of flight without warning. They leap off the wall, propelled by the power of vision, rippling through their bodies into expanding spaces where horizons recede. Somewhere in transit, heading towards unknown sky, however, they nurse some disorientation. I can see. There is so much, but what am I looking for? And what do I do now? This essay is about language, all mine in different ways, all dragons on the wall. At the end of 1999, my father hangs up a newly purchased map of China and points to a tiny dot on its eastern coast, saying, "This is where we're going to live." I'm 8, and this news is bewildering. I understand departure, but don't understand relocation. I stare at the map. I have always boarded a plane certain of its status as a detour, a visit to my maternal extended family in Sarawak, a short vacation. But I've never questioned the return flight. My father's proposition of a new home is beyond me. On the cusp of my teens in 2004, I experienced a second disorientation when my family moves to Hong Kong. A turn of events I receive with great indignation and a sulk that persists for 6 months. The city is worn down and bustling, life crammed into every concrete block, and a stark contrast to the nostalgic sheen of Suzhou's preserved historicity. Postscript 2. Countless miles and years later, the dragons discuss the subject with each other for the 100th time. So how do you feel about this perpetual wandering, one asks? Given the choice, would you want this again? Vision, the sky, the possible world, but no guarantee of grounding? I don't know, but I miss the others, says number 2. I wonder how they weathered all these years on the wall. My Singaporean father speaks Teochew. My Malaysian mother speaks Fuzhou. They also speak Hokkien. And then everyone speaks Cantonese, sort of. All these languages I have heard since young and possess no critical mass of fluency in. Yet, rather than disorientation, this cacophony of tongues is comforting, it's grounding. I still find solace in spaces where the general chatter around me is ambient, inaccessible sound. In the cities I have relationships with, their soundscapes of legible and incomprehensible languages are consistent and familiar presences of my life. And then in 2009, when I leave Asia for Toronto, Canada, I experienced breakage again. Now I am an fluent English speaker, but my tongue is chubby and hesitant. Postscript 3. The townspeople make pilgrimages to the wall long after the miracle is over. There they retell and embellish the thrilling moment of dragonflight. There they admire Zhang's 2 remaining eyeless dragons. Over dinner, they discuss dragon sightings and possible returns. Amidst the chatter, Zhang Xingyo is claimed, unclaimed, owned, disowned, recognized, unrecognized. Depending on the day, the mood, and the group at the table, he might be a magician, a possessed and dangerous man, the town's pride and joy, a passing traveler, or a genius of unknowable but surely humble origin. After everything, I possess a forked tongue. The absent second T of Toronto follows me all the way back to Asia. My A sounds are flat and nasally. I work in Chinese translation. I transcribe and edit Singlish interviews for the library archives. I write forked tongue poetry. In conversation with family, my graduate English is grown into Singlish like those magnificent tree roots clenched into concrete. More and more often, my parents respond to me with, "Tu chim farasla." Postscript 4. The spectacle is at first enthralling. Then, as with all spectacles, it is eventually forgotten. One day, Zhang Xingyo develops a headache after yet another crowd disperses. "Fuck," he says, facing the half-empty wall. I cave to their demands again. I wanted their praise. Who am I without this spectacle? Where can I go next? I affirm that old myths turn into new ones. This is my story, after all, where I paint the wall seriously, with much effort, in reiterative language, acknowledging how every retelling is burdened with the need for new and repeating narratives and definitions. This means this. That means that. Do you see what I mean? Yeah, you see what I mean? Thank you. That was I Draw the Eyes In. The prose poem that I'm reading is called This Poem is the Apartment I Clean in the Mornings of My Life. This poem is the apartment I clean in the mornings of my life. Number 2. Messy, like the morning after, fatigue and grog, tasks ignored, a body hurt from being slept on, not enough, hair on the floor, in the sheets, last night's dishes, and 3 cardigans flung over the same chair. The news, violent and sensational. Messy, like our hands covered in crab, shell on the table, the conversation between and around, the death of a fly, still life, leftovers. Messy, the way romantic is a smokescreen for atemporal grief. I feel embarrassed, exposed uncertainly. I have resolved to face the world, but was so afraid. I was desperate to turn away, I tell you, but then the world came anyway through the windows, ash on a summer wind. It's messy, since even if anger flashes bright in your head, even if your heartbeat plays like a war drum in your throat, you might still find yourself frozen in the ugliness of it all. A small stick in your hands. How hard you grip doesn't matter if you never swing. And if this should happen, please comfort me. Please send me courage. Do not hurry on. It's all messy, nights and nightmares, refuge and compulsion, the shadow and light of love warping every day, everywhere, every time, reaching for skin and blood vessel, the blurring of function and fact, mud and mangrove saying brace, brace for it all. Visions of lotus looming in the Buddha's footsteps, blooming to not bear, to refuse. To refuse is to make messy. All this withering with no purpose, flowers falling like dandruff, the branch barren and jobless. I unfruit, my scalp itches. I scratch, as in, it still feels wrong for now, but I accept. I swing. How easily you held my hand beside the low tide of the world, June Jordan says. How easily you held my hand beside the low tide of the world. So now I breathe from the belly. Please hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, for those lovely readings and the earlier meditation on language. And thank you, Aisha, for the deeper look at the process of editing creative nonfiction. So with that, we're coming to a close for the night. We hope that you've all enjoyed the readings tonight and getting to know how things work behind the scene at Suspect. Before we end, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to an indispensable team member who cannot join us tonight, but whose hand is behind every piece that you see published. She is none other than Candice Bresmer, our copy editor. We always appreciate her fine and careful eye. And a final shout out to as well to our team member Emily von Borstel, our website and social media manager, whose efforts are so necessary in putting together what you see online. So with that, we have come to the end of our celebrations. We look forward to seeing you all again, whether in future events, in our inbox, or anywhere around the place. I know that we're all scattered all over the world, but if we're ever in the same place at the same time, we'd love to say hi. So what we are looking for is to cultivate an ecosystem of writers and readers. So with that said, thank you everyone for being here, and we hope that you keep in touch. Have a good night or a good morning. Bye.